throughout the country who are pursuing what we believe is the most just agenda, and that is for educational equity. Over this past year, I know many of you who are a part of the classroom, supporting students in a number of ways, students experiencing homelessness, students in the foster care system, students who experience and who have been incarcerated. The pandemic has really thrown all of us for a loop. And in fact, the multiple pandemics of COVID-19 and anti-racism have really taken its toll on the communities that we like to bring voice to and work directly with. So excited that you're here. Please continue to use the chat to put your name and your organization. And we'll also be taking questions as well. I'm going to give folks a little bit more time to join us, and then we'll get started. Again, thank you for joining us. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm just giving folks a little bit more time to log on. Denise Fort with the Education Trust. We're so glad you're here. We've got a great program today with some amazing advocates from Food Research and Action Center. We also have friends from No Kid Hungry. Just really excited, as well as a local charter school. Super excited to have you. We're going to be learning so much today. As I was just sharing earlier, this pandemic has thrown so many of us for a loop, and as advocates and as folks who believe that the moment is now, there's deep urgency to address some of the structural ills that have brought about not just COVID-19, but anti-racism. The quest for educational justice and equity is probably even more important. And the intersections that we have seen with food insecurity, housing insecurity, they are right in front of us. So we are excited to be able to speak with you today about these issues. And I think I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Fort. I am the Senior Vice President for Partnerships and Engagement at the Education Trust. And I'm so excited to welcome you both to our boot camp, but to this session, Food Security as a Means of Realizing Educational Equity. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists and provide a little background on this session. But as I mentioned earlier, as I do that, we would love to see who's here in the room with us. Please put your name and organization into the chat. So over the past year, we have seen the impact of multiple pandemics on our nation. We have seen the health impacts of COVID-19, as well as a national reckoning with the continued realities of racism and the substantial economic toll that these pandemics have taken on all families. With these ongoing multiple pandemics, Ed Trust has felt obligated to step in and respond to these intersecting issues, including housing insecurity, hunger, food insecurity, both in response to COVID-19, but also as a means to realizing educational equity, because all these sectors are very much connected. Recent data suggests that as many as 1 in 4 children struggled with food insecurity in 2020 due to COVID-19 and the economic downturn. We know that food insecurity prior to and during the pandemic falls hardest on communities of color, women, and those who lack access to employment opportunities that pay a living wage. This is unacceptable. However, it is a call to action, of which many of you have already led the way and others are joining. We at the Education Trust have made it a priority to not only break down silos across agencies, such as education, nutrition, anti-hunger, but proactively facilitate these conversations in service of the students who depend on their schools and communities for meals each day. So today we have some amazing panelists. I'm just so thrilled that they're joining us. They are going to help us get started with this work of breaking down barriers and learning about the intersection of education equity and food insecurity. They will share with us more about some stories about food insecurity, but also the important actions that need to be taken at the federal, state, and local level to provide much needed relief. I really hope that you will leave this session with specific ideas or actions you can take to engage in state and or federal policymaking and advocacy. So here we go. Let me introduce these amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Rachel Sabella. Rachel is the director of No Kid Hungry New York, a national campaign by Share Our Strength, where she works every day to advocate for more than 19% of children in New York who live in food insecure homes. Next up, Ellen Teller, who is the Director of Government Affairs at the Food Research and Action Center, also known as FRAC, where she works with Congress, national organizations, and FRAC's state and local grassroots field network to advocate for improved access and participation in anti-hunger programs for low-income individuals and families. And then Lola, who is our Director of Food and Wellness at DC Bilingual Public Charter School in DC, obviously. She's been the Director of Food and Wellness at DC Bilingual since 2016, but her work over the past 21 years has spanned arts, education, urban agriculture, public policy, and school nutrition. So excited that she's here to talk with us about holistic well-being in schools and communities. And she'll be sharing her perspective, work on the ground. Look, friends, this panel knows so much more than I do, so I'm going to stop talking. But let me just first say, let's keep these things in mind as we begin this conversation. There are a number of school nutrition programs that exist to serve kids and their families. If you don't know about them, get to know them, USDA.org. Research from USDA indicates that children who participate in the National School Lunch Program have superior national intakes compared to those who bring lunch or otherwise do not participate. We also know that properly nourished children can more actively participate in their education experience. That benefits them, their fellow students, and the entire community. And adequate nutrition, which is possible with the help of many programs, such as school breakfast and SNAP, is linked to better health outcomes, early brain development, improved socialization. All good things. We need more of that. So let's learn more about that. Ellen, given what we know about the impact of these programs prior to COVID, partnered with the reality of hunger in our nation during COVID, what has this last year taught us? And how much have the programs expanded to address need in the wake of COVID? Oops.
To the Education Trust for inviting me to participate. It is a pleasure to be here today with colleagues and also with Denise, who we have a very long relationship working on a number of reauthorization bills. And she was honored by my organization for her work on a child nutrition bill. And that was the only year we ever honored Hill staff. So that was very special. So we learned a lot in the last year, but for those of us who've been in the movement for a very long time, we knew that food insecurity was an issue long before the pandemic. But what happened was when the pandemic hit, it just exacerbated everything we already knew. But it really shone a light on different communities that were disproportionately impacted. And that was overwhelmingly communities of color, children in rural communities, and it's easy to see why. When we talk about the child nutrition and school meals programs, it's the preschool programs, WIC and the child care feeding program, the school-based programs, as Denise said, breakfast and lunch, and then the out-of-school time programs like after-school snacks and suppers and summer feeding. all of these programs have profound impacts on both the educational development of children, their health impacts, and their future economic development. So when schools were shuttered and kids were doing remote learning, they were missing out on their school breakfasts and school lunches, and in many cases, their childcare meals. And so we had been trying for years, and I know Rachel's been involved in this as well, to start a summer EBT program so that when kids are not in school and getting their breakfast and lunch, they should get meals. Their family should get an EBT card, and their parents could go to the grocery store, the farmer's market, the CSA, and get the food needed for the children when they're not getting their meals at school or they're not at a summer feeding site. Well, drip, drip, drip. Every year we get a few more dollars, and a couple more, areas of the country would get in that program. Overnight, the pandemic EBT program was started to address the necessity of children getting fed. And all of a sudden, states had to ramp up and start this process. So for kids in households with SNAP, it's easy. You just load up that amount on your SNAP EBT card. But if you're a child in a family not on SNAP, your family had to get an EBT card, and then it got loaded up and you were able to go. So the truth of the matter is that during the pandemic, Congress was able to organically watch these programs grow to fill the need, like the SNAP program, but also to make changes in the programs to accommodate the unique circumstances of a pandemic. Some schools delivered meals. The school buses were dropping off meals at the school bus stops. Some parents were showing up at the schools and picking up meals. So the schools, in many cases, continue to generate the meals for the kids, and USDA gave them the waivers to pick up multiple meals at one time. So the ability of these programs to stretch and cover the kids was really a testament to the structure of the programs, which over decades we have protected to make sure that they could grow. But there were new programs that had to be established to fill this extraordinary need.
Sorry, loving technologies. I'm moving things around. Thank you, Ellen. Long pause. Ken, I think, what's important here is also to dig in just a little bit more to sort of understand how these programs need to work together with school lunch, school breakfast, out of school time, because, whoever put this in there is reminding me that, ending hunger, addressing food insecurity is not a one size fits all approach. Rachel, I'm wondering if you could talk to that a little bit. It's not enough to increase SNAP benefits and say we've solved hunger, right? As Ellen pointed out, pandemic EBT was really, really important to that. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Thank you again, Denise, for having me. Excited to get to talk to everyone today. I think that's so important to remember in this. One program is not going to end hunger. It's going to take so many different ones working together and also looking at different populations. There's different needs of kids before they're in school, kids when they're in schools, also for their families that are taking care of them. We saw the federal government put the additional investment into the SNAP program. It is incredible. We knew SNAP benefits, and for most people, ended before the end of the month. This is going to help them get a little further, but for many people, it's still not going to fill the need. So we need those school meal programs. Ellen referenced the pandemic EBT program. I can't tell you how many emails I got from families across the state of New York who found my email address saying, "What is this? I need help." I think one of the things that also came out in the pandemic is we saw with high unemployment, then people would find other jobs to help fill the need, but they were underemployed. Maybe they didn't know they were eligible for SNAP programs. They thought, oh, I make too much money. Well, PEBT, depending on where they were, they still got it. In the New York City schools, every single child was eligible. So families that were right at that border, the difference that it could make to help them. We really saw this, but we still, I think, really need to see more. There's more money invested in the benefits, but we need to see partners coming together, state and local governments, increasing awareness and outreach. I had a lot of state officials in New York say, but we have the SNAP benefit. I said, but did you promote it to anybody? Like, how are we building that too? This is going to take a long time. We know the world is opening up a little bit. People are getting their vaccinations. But what this pandemic did in food insecurity reversed 10 years of progress. It's not going to change overnight. So it's why we need to make sure every family knows about each of these programs, that schools are embracing it and really putting the word out there and helping connect kids and families to meals.
Thank you, Rachel. Lola, you've had firsthand, sort of appreciation being a leader at a school. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you approached the past year with your students and with your families? I mean, schools have always been a center for many communities, and I'd love for you to share more. Tell us a little bit about your school, who attends, and then how things have worked out for you.
Sure. Thanks for having me on this forum. I really appreciate being alongside Ellen and Rachel right now and hearing them give the context. Is bringing back lots of thoughts for me because this has been quite a year, right? We at DC Bilingual, we're a pre-K through 5th grade charter school here in DC. We serve 480 students. And before the pandemic, we had a significant amount of food insecurity amongst our population that we would meet with. We have the free and reduced meal program. We're not a CEP school. A CEP school is a school that has a certain percentage of at-risk students and therefore has free meals for everyone. That we don't have that qualification, but we do serve a number of families who experienced food insecurity, and we met those needs through previously through partnering with our local food bank and through bringing in other partner organizations to assist with things like SNAP application or getting to know like local farmers markets that would accept SNAP dollars and other resources that the city provides. But of course, as the pandemic kicked off, before the pandemic, I feel like my job was a lot around like, let's learn about food together. Let's get excited about food. At our school, we have a scratch prep kitchen, so we prepare all of our meals on site. We have a really strong focus on providing nutritious meals and talking about like what does health mean to the different people and cultures in our school. And we also have a strong gardening education and culinary education program within our building. But once the pandemic hit, it was like, that's all nice, but we need you to get us food. And I realized very quickly, sort of with shock, the burden that was being placed on school food districts and schools throughout the country to be the safety net in a lot of ways for folks. And I saw very quickly as well our food, the pieces of our food system that sort of fell apart. It's hard to prepare meals and for lots of kids when your delivery trucks aren't coming as often as they did, and there's shortages in the delivery chains, and there's, all kinds of new regulations coming out all the time on how you package meals, how you stay together in a kitchen or you don't. There's the fact that, many of the folks who work in food service themselves sometimes experience food insecurity and income inequality. And what that looks like during a pandemic can be that you don't always have staff around for you. My staff didn't get like a special childcare provision during this time to feed other people's children. So what we did end up doing during this time is providing meals. We had a twice weekly meal pickup system for families. We were an open site through SSO, which allowed any student under 18 and under to pick up meals or for their family to pick up meals from our site. And we also continued our relationship with the Capillary Food Bank to do regular distributions of food. And I would say that a big part of, I think, our success and ability to do outreach in this work was by partnering and advertising through the Mutual Aid Network, DC. And I think it's really, in DC in particular, it's been incredibly important to have mutual aid networks in place to do the actual, moving things around and contacting people that this work requires. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. When you were talking a little bit about SNAP participation and PEBT, which was also just like all of a sudden it was like, oh, Lola, like you're going to get a bunch of phone calls soon from people who need these cards. And I was just like, okay, I'll do what I can. But one issue that I saw showing up for us and our families is that before and during the pandemic, there was also a political climate that deterred many of our families from applying for SNAP or any other federal benefits because of fear of, I forget what it was called, but the public something, it was, you probably know, but fear of basically not being able to complete immigration to this country or being possibly deported. So when we think about how, thank you, public charge rule. So when we think about how, when you both were talking about how the pieces kind of come together to work, it's also identifying where those holes existed and how we need to look to the folks on the ground to tell us what those holes were. And when, Ellen, you were talking a little bit about the advocacy that took place in order for these changes to quickly turn around so that we could do this work, it made me think, well, how is some of these things that those changes were incredibly valuable and I don't want them to go away. And how do we keep them in place? And then I wondered, who in this room right now is not involved in food or the food system? Who on this call is a principal? Who is part of the teaching and learning department, maybe at the State Department of Education? Who's at the table today? And how do their voices play a role in the advocacy of this work? Because I'll tell you one thing, the first thing that was most important to my head of school and my principals was that we had food. It was not around it was also, yes, how do we teach the children? But the first people in the building were me and my team. And so if this happens again, when this happens again, how do we set things up so we don't experience the same failures?
I love that your leadership, I love that your leadership understood that food was necessary, like the first line of defense, particularly, with COVID and just what the incredible health disparities. Food is something that keeps you whole, and as your title says it's part of wellness. So I love that. I'm going to invite Ellen into this part of the conversation, but I also appreciate you, Lola, because you pretty much lead us into the next question for both Ellen and Rachel. But Ellen, why don't you go first, and then I'll ask the question.
Lola, so glad you mentioned the public charge rule. People on this call meeting need to understand that although SNAP has requirements for whom may participate, and there are some eligibility requirements that deal with your citizenship status, the child nutrition and school meal programs do not have a citizenship requirement. And what we saw when the public charge rule came down, even before it was issued, when it was rumored to be issued, we had stories of women going to WIC clinics, returning their WIC benefits because they did not want to be deemed a public charge. You had people saying, my child does not need free school meals anymore because of the fear. And we saw WIC participation numbers plummet because of that. And so that is a huge part of all the moving pieces here. So we've been working for decades to get participation numbers up and to eliminate the barriers to participation. And when we first started, Denise, you mentioned silos. And each of these programs developed at different times to serve different populations. And Rachel, you are so right. We need the separate programs to be tailored to the needs of different populations. WIC serves a completely different population than school-age children. And other programs are dealing with when kids are out of school versus when they're in school. So we really need to be making sure that there is some amount of seamlessness, though, going on in these programs. And Denise knows we worked together and we're still working on trying to break down the silos so that if I'm an after-school provider and I've got kids coming into my agency and I'm providing educational enrichment, cultural arts, GED prep, whatever I'm doing after school, the kids are coming in and I'm giving them a snack and a meal. The last day of school arrives, I have to close down that program and the next day open up a whole new program, the summer, meals program. I'm serving the same kids in the same site. I'm the same sponsor, but I got to run a whole new program with its own set of rules and regulations. This makes no sense. And when we went to Congress and said, break down the barrier, let providers run the program seamlessly throughout the school year and into the summer and during holidays when schools are closed, everybody loved it. Then the Congressional Budget Office told us it's too expensive because it would work, that more sponsors would want to come into the programs, more kids would come into the programs, so we can't do it. And we're sitting there saying, wait a minute, you're telling us we can't do it because it would work? And they would be, yeah, because then there'll be more meals that we have to pay for. And then you sit there and say, well, isn't this a really great investment in, meals and good nutrition for kids so they can go to after school programs and get, tutoring or educational enrichment? And everyone says yes, but it's just never made it to that priority where you make it happen.
I hear you, Ellen. That's right on, and it's a good place for Rachel to lean in and talk with, you hear what Ellen just said, as a state advocate, as a local advocate, what should we be doing? What should we be asking for? What should we be telling policymakers at the state and federal level about how we make this all work and how we make this a matter of equity? This is really a matter of equity. How do we do that?
I do have to say one thing to what Ellen said, which I think is something that has driven advocates in the state of New York crazy for a long time about how programs aren't streamlined. There is something in New York called the school-age child care regulations that govern how after-school programs can operate in a school building. It's through the Department of Health, as opposed to the State Education Department overseeing schools. You know where I'm going on this, that a building is safe from 9 to 3, but it is not safe and needs changes from 3 to 9. Those are the places where those inefficiencies. I spent 12 years working in after school programs. We did everything that we could to change that, but it exists in so many programs. And when we think about streamlining, we think about New York. We've got SNAP and PEBT in one agency. We have school breakfast, school lunch, and summer meals in one agency. Then we have after school meals in another agency, farm to school programs and still another that are not coordinating. So how is it people talking together, finding those efficiencies? At the state level, going back to the real question, I'm sorry, Denise, I had to go off on those SAC regs. They just drive everyone crazy. But what I think is so important is working in partnership and for all groups to come together. One of the things we saw on PEBT, specifically in New York, is every group wanted to get involved. Every group wanted to have a voice on it. The state agency could only talk to so many people. And when everyone became united and were able to do some calls together to be able to really push for policy change, you had more response from the state agency as well, because they saw it was a group coming and it was only one phone call for them. So not to say that we all need to, when we all cared about the same programs, and right now, when things were moving, or just over the last year, things were moving so quickly, we were setting up systems in real time. Being able to work together was really key. I also always recommend, and it tends to be my default answer, let's also talk to our elected officials. Sometimes it's policy change. Sometimes it's them doing a sign-on letter to the agency and getting some answers that advocates can't always get. I've had such positive responses. We worked with the Social Services Committee in the New York State Assembly when the Biden transition team was looking for recommendations. They said, what can we ask for related to child food insecurity? We worked with them. They sent their letter. So I think it's really for advocates to be talking to all different stakeholders in their states and seeing how those voices can be heard. And for some of you on the call, you may be like me. We also have a city government. In New York City, we have a $92 billion budget. That's larger than many states. So there's a lot of advocacy that can be happening there too. And again, asking them to push on these programs to be looking at how change can come.
Oops, hold on. Go for it, Ellen.
I was just going to add a one minute addition to friendly amendment. I think you're right, Rachel. I think the things that we got during the pandemic to stretch these programs, we have to claw onto them moving forward. We had a nationwide pilot program going on with PEBT, with the waivers, with the flexibilities, where kids were all participating in these programs. We are banging down the door of the administration saying, right now, all children are getting free breakfast and lunch in school. We need you to extend that out for at least another year. And the same thing with PEBT. Do not sunset that program. Whenever schools are closed, let's do the summer and out of school time EBT program so that kids will get fed when school is closed. So again, clawing on to the improvements that we got through this nationwide pilot program and going to Congress and in a very bipartisan way, saying to our elected officials, children get one shot at childhood. There is no do-over. So if we miss this opportunity to continue to nourish and feed our kids, that opportunity is going to be lost forever.
Yeah, I want to tack on to that because it made me think, I love listening to both of you because a lot of times my head is in the fighting fires of the day, did the milk show up? But hearing you both, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And it makes me think about how when we started advertising our meals and everything, we reached out to our local clinic that's right around the corner, Mary Center, because they were seeing and receiving, clients still and children in their offices that were experiencing food insecurity. And so almost how can school nutrition programs also as we're going to be approaching like children going to the doctor more as schools open, but also probably going to doctors to get vaccinations as this, year goes on, how can we partner with healthcare to promote these programs? Because I do know that even though that these waivers came into play, all these, and I agree, I want them to last for at least another year because we're still in the thick of this. But still, schools experienced a drop in participation. There were school districts that experienced a severe, and we as well, not all of we probably had about, in a good week, maybe 30% of our students or participation as before, whereas beforehand we were, hovering around 80%. So it makes me think about just outreach, connecting to folks who still need this food, who might not be getting it for whatever reason. Maybe, for example, they do think there's a public charge clause still in place incorrectly, or maybe they just don't even know that these programs still exist. Maybe they thought it was just during the peak of the pandemic. And how do we continue to create that communication and partner with other agencies that might see the need before we, the lunch ladies, see it?
That's such a great idea. I think that's absolutely right. For Rachel and or Ellen and Lola, for folks who have not engaged in nutrition advocacy, can you maybe give them some tips for the road? For example, who might be the agency in their state? Because I think, as Rachel said, there might be multiple ones, but who might be your top people to think about? Same thing goes for Lola. I know that you're in the charter system, but obviously you have a few different things that you work through. But what do you think is the highest leverage points for this kind of advocacy, both the who and the what right now?
To start with the federal, we have been able, through decades of efforts, for these programs to maintain what is called, it's an elite status. It's called an entitlement status. It means, like Social Security, if you are eligible and you meet the criteria, you get the benefits. That's the way our child nutrition and school meals programs operate, but for the WIC program. And so we are only limited by how much outreach we do, as Lola and Rachel had mentioned, and getting information out to people so they come into these programs. So I always start with your federal elected officials. And much like Rachel said, our jurisdiction in Congress is split much along the lines that these jurisdictions are split at the state level. So in the Senate, we're in the Senate Agriculture Committee. In the House, we're in the House Education and Labor Committee, a hearing room that Denise is intimately familiar with. And so we are fortunate, especially in the Senate, that we are headed into a reauthorization of these programs. That's when Congress literally opens up the books on what governs the operations of these programs. We have an opportunity this year in the reauthorization to make some changes. And Rachel had mentioned community eligibility. That is a wonderful tool that I believe Denise was the matriarch of this program, where if you're in a school district with a high concentration of low-income kids in a school building, and you've got a lot of kids coming in through SNAP and through TANF, that through a formula, you can serve all children in that school free of charge. And we are looking at ways of expanding that out so that we can go to Congress and say, look, why are you doing all this verification and data collection when you know that the kids in the school come from low-income families? Let's just do away with the administrative red tape and burdensome, processes and just feed the kids. And there are a lot of wonderful proposals, and I put in the chat some of the recommendations that we have moving forward for the preschool, school-based, and out-of-school time programs. But I think the anti-hunger community is also rallying around expanding free school meals and also this pandemic EBT, making that into a summer program and an out-of-school time program. So if kids are not going to sites, their families are getting a summer or an out-of-school time EBT card to fill in the gap.
I would say I'm going to do very brief, Denise, but thinking about a state level, number one, it's also understanding what is the reality of your state. For example, in New York, we have an opportunity to play offense when it comes to SNAP. We're not playing defense on proposals, so we've looked at how can we expand programs working with the legislature. So I really recommend for the advocates on the call today, seeing what the reality of your landscape is. Again, in New York, our state education department is not under the governor. We have a separate state board of regents. So looking at where it plays, understanding that target, and then really pushing them to make those changes. Just going to look different in all 50 states.
Lola, what about you when you think about the work you're doing at your school? What is the best way that an advocate could duplicate what you're doing?
Wow, that's such a good question. I've been thinking a lot about that. And in fact, like I'm working with some folks from No Kid Hungry on looking to see how to replicate some of these processes, and so that it's not just like siloed off from school to school. I honestly just have to co-sign what Ellen and Rachel both said in terms of actions that one would need to take. The free school meals for everyone would be a huge administrative gift, because I think something I think about a lot is that, you know, people sometimes get excited about what we do at DC Bilingual, and they're like, how can I replicate it? And I'm like, well, like I said earlier, you have to have leadership, of course, that, and in our case, we're a charter school, so we are a little more independent than DCPS, but even DCPS has some really strong leadership around school food right now, and who believes that this is, as Denise mentioned towards the beginning, it's like you can't have academic success without school food, and you can't have nutritious children if they're not learning. So, or children who are receiving nutrition if they're not learning. So I think that when I think about how to continue this work, it's absolutely like supporting any initiatives or legislation that reduce that administrative burden, because there's so many people out there who want to create innovative programming around feeding children and accessing and meeting folks where they're at in their communities, because every community is different. And partnering with local organizations so that school food is not just, you know, the lunch ladies in the basement. We're a hub for connectivity in every school, you know, just like the kitchen in your house. I would hope that every school food initiative in every school feels like the kitchen in your house, if you know how to cook. So, but definitely, I think like thinking about ways to reduce that administrative burden is going to lay down the groundwork for more creativity, creative initiatives that address hunger in our communities.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for this really rich conversation. We still have a little bit more time, and in doing so, I just wanted to have Ellen sort of highlight for us, and I know she put some of these in the chat. We should probably re-enter those into the chat again, if Sarah could do that for us. Some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can and should be done in this new reauthorization. How do we focus our attention there, Ellen?
The administration is rolling out the red carpet for us. We anticipate in the next week or two, the Human Infrastructure American Family Plan will be introduced. And we know that, for instance, childcare is going to be an important pillar of supporting work. So we've been working with the administration saying one of our asks for the child nutrition reauthorization, and it has been for years, if kids are in childcare for long periods of time, or you've got parents with non-traditional work schedules, there should be the ability of having an extra meal for kids who are in care for long periods. Little babies, little children, toddlers, they have little bellies. They require multiple small meals throughout the course of the day. Let's give those childcare providers the option of serving kids who are in care for long periods of time the extra snack and meal. We mentioned in the school-based programs, we really want to see that community eligibility provision expanded and more kids coming into the free meals category. We want to get rid of a lot of the red tape and the administrative issues that have been barriers. I mean, school food service officials should not be MBAs and accountants. They should be working on creative food and culinary experience for kids in their care. I know that No Kid Hungry is very involved as well in breakfast after the bell and innovative breakfast programs. For so long, we were banging down doors to get the breakfast programs into schools. Then they started having them, but the kids were in the cafeteria before the school bell. And the kids weren't showing up. When schools implemented breakfast after the bell and other innovative delivery systems for breakfast, all the kids were participating. And when the school bell rang, the kids were in homeroom and they were nourished and ready to rock. And something that has been mentioned in all of our conversations is once you have a kid who gets a good breakfast and is well fed, they're going to be less likely to show up to school hungry, less likely to be absent or tardy, less likely to go to the school nurse during the course of the day. And the studies show us, and this was remarkable, the children are less agitated. They're less disruptive in class. So visits to the vice principal's office went down when kids got breakfast at school. So everything your grandmother told you about breakfast is true, and it works. And then we also talked about the out-of-school time programs. We want to see that summer EBT out-of-school time benefit on the EBT card. We want to see support for summer feeding sites. And we know that there, as Lola mentioned, are sites that are providing meals to kids on the weekends and over other periods of time. Right now, there are waivers in effect that allow them to send multiple meals out to families. We think that should continue. So it's really allowing all of these pilots and these waivers and flexibilities that are going on now to continue into the reauthorization effort. And my last point, which is really important, is that the most fun about lobbying these programs is the incredible coalitions we work with marching up to the Hill. When we used to go visit Denise, we were there with representatives from the education community, the health community, nutrition, religious groups, all the stakeholders, childcare providers, the Boys and Girls Clubs, and the Ys and Parks and Recs. I mean, all these people come together with a common ask. We were very much united in our push forward. And when a member of Congress or a staffer sees that many communities represented in a single ask, it is very powerful.
I think I've heard partnership throughout this entire thing, whether it's bringing folks to the table as a school to be partners with and leaning in on those resources, but also as advocates at the state and local level. Leave no stakeholder behind. How about that? Look, thank you all so much for your past time. This was so great. The Education Trust will be doing more things like this where we bring in new friends and new partners who are equally interested in a more just community, a just society where educational equity is accessible for everyone. So I thank you. I'm so glad to have met some new friends, Rachel, Lola. I'm just blessed that whenever I get to do anything with Ellen. So have a great day. You guys are amazing. Thank you, Ed Trust, and thank you, advocates, for joining us.
Thank you. It was great meeting you all.